Going to stop meeting people on Tinder. Female 29 met a guy from Tinder in person who was 27. I had a weird feeling right from the start. Now I wish I hadn't gone. We decided to meet at a casino and walk around. He stared at me the whole time. I don't really know what I was doing hanging out with him. But I decided to a couple more times. Was intimate with him. But I had a feeling like I didn't like it. Anyway, the creepy part is that he looked up all my information online, found out my address, who I live with, who my relatives are, where I went to school, grew up. Fucking awful. And continued to terrorize me in any way he could, finding me on LinkedIn, calling me names in the comments of various posts. Reading my entire blog from when I was 15 that I can't delete because the email is old. I managed to delete everything, and once I have money, I'm going to use that site, Delete Me. This is the first time anything like this has ever happened, and I'm definitely freaked out. I also have no friends where I live, so it's made me feel really lonely. I wish no one had to experience this kind of anxiety. I'm never going to be able to have any public social media profiles. I have to hide everything. It's insane that someone from Tinder I met a few times would do this. I'm not going to be meeting people online anymore. Man tried to enter my house. I came home around 12 a.m. to the house I share with 4 roommates. When walking on the sidewalk, I noticed a man across the street facing the other side, seemingly doing nothing. I passed by and entered my house, locking the door, and went to the kitchen, passing one of my roommates on the living room couch. The hallway from the front doorway opens into the living room and then to the kitchen. When I left the kitchen, I saw a dark outline through the door window and stopped to focus my eyes. My couch roommate looked at me confused, as I had just stopped in my tracks. The outer door was open and the man from across the street was looking in, and then started turning the knob. As I heard the knob start rattling, I said something like, "There's a fucking guy at our door." My roommate got up from the couch, alarmed, and we together got closer to the door. I could see the man's face clearer now, pressed up against the door window. His face was blank. He had long oily hair and pockmarks on his cheeks. His expression made me feel incredibly uncomfortable, as it seemed he was looking through us, with no recognition of us. My roommate called down to my basement roommate to make sure his door leading to the backyard was locked. I got closer to the man as he kept trying the handle to go upstairs and alarm my other roommate. When we came back down, the man wasn't at the door, so we peered out the window to see him standing in our walkway looking across the street again. Reflecting on this, I'm just happy I remembered to lock the door, because we'd often stupidly forget and spend the night with the door unlocked. I can imagine if the door was unlocked and had he stepped into our house, I wonder how this would have went. I think about how he would probably have walked through the hallway and my roommate on the couch would just see this stranger walk into our living room and scare the shit out of him. Most likely, this guy was drugged out by the way his expression was, but who knows what intentions he had. Let's not meet. I recorded the moment a guy came to my house with a gun. I'm in university right now, but staying with my parents at their house for the summer. I was hanging out with one of my friends and we decided to go to a party. I met this guy around my age. We were talking and having fun, but it was nothing too serious, or so I thought. We exchanged phone numbers. We hung out a couple of times, but he became incredibly clingy right from the start, so I decided to distance myself in the hope that he would get the hint and back off. Well, he didn't. When I stopped responding, he sent me over 100 messages, with each message becoming increasingly more aggressive as time went on. Keep in mind, it had been less than 2 weeks since we first met. I finally responded and told him he needed to chill out. He appeared to calm down a bit after I responded, but he then asked for a phone call. I agreed, and we talked for a while. He told me that he couldn't stop thinking about me, that I was the best thing that ever happened to him, etc. Just a bunch of stuff that is way too intense to say to someone you barely know. I tried to let him down gently, reminding him that I was only home for the summer and wasn't looking for anything serious beyond a fling, but this only made him angrier. He started yelling at me, insulting me, calling me a slut, basically a complete 180 from what he had been saying mere minutes ago. Then all of a sudden the phone went silent. After a pause, he said in a quiet voice, "Bitch, you had better get ready because I'm coming over for you." And then he hung up the phone. This was very frightening because he knew my parents were out of town for the week and that I was staying at their house alone. However, he didn't know where my parents' house was because I was always the one driving, and he didn't know my friend either, so I thought he had no way of figuring it out, since again, I'm normally living at school in another state. Regardless, I locked all the doors and shut the blinds just in case. After a while, maybe an hour or so, I fell asleep. When I woke up, I looked at my phone and saw a notification on my lock screen. It was from the Ring app, indicating there had been movement on my parents' camera. It was him. If you watch the video, you can clearly see something in his hand. When he notices the camera, however, he left. I immediately blocked him on everything and reported the incident. I have no idea what he planned to do once he got here. It was terrifying to realize that he had come over when I was asleep and defenseless, and completely unaware of his presence. As I would later find out, he was able to get my address from my phone number. Apparently he Googled it and it returned my dad's name as the owner of the phone number, along with my parents' address. Since I am on my parents' phone plan, I guess it shows up that I still live here. This revelation was fucking horrifying, as I never knew my phone number could reveal my home address. I'm still extremely upset that this kind of private information is on the internet for anyone to find, as it's incredibly dangerous that websites will just give this away to anyone. Please learn from my mistakes and do not give anyone your phone number unless you trust them. I found out that you can get a free Google Voice number to text and call people, and that number can't be traced back to you so easily. My advice is to use a disposable number for anyone you're talking to that you meet informally or online. I still can't sleep at night. Hopefully this never happens to anyone else. Strange man walked into my backyard and watched me from my balcony. Hey everyone, I don't post much on Reddit, but I need to get out what just happened a few hours ago. This seemed like the place to put it. For some background first, I'm a 29-year-old woman. I live in an apartment in a sketchy air side of my town, so I'm not unaccustomed to strange people pulling up and strange things happening. I've been through a home break-in, so I'm very hyper-vigilant when it comes to keeping myself and my home safe. I also smoke cigarettes, nasty habit I know. But having cats and not wanting my house to reek like smoke, I'll walk out to my balcony to smoke. That's exactly what I was doing when this happened. I was sitting on my balcony, smoking and just enjoying my night, when I noticed a car I've never seen before pull into the back parking lot of my apartment right by my balcony. I initially felt a bit off, but I didn't want to come off as being the paranoid neighbor, so I keep sitting and smoking my cigarette. Then I hear footsteps making a beeline through my backyard. There's a large and burly man that I've never seen before walking briskly through my backyard. Again, I still don't try to make much of it because they might be there for my neighbor. My anxiety is definitely on alert, but not in panic mode, until I realize he's going straight for my portion of the backyard. He then does something that is still freaking me out as I type this. He stops right in my backyard and looks up at me on my balcony, not saying a word. Now I'm in absolute panic mode. I audibly say, "Oh fuck no," spring up, slam and lock my balcony door, run to my upstairs bathroom, and dial 911. I listened to every sound from downstairs while I stood panicking in my bathroom, and truthfully it sounded like someone was messing with my back door. I don't know for sure because I was in hypervigilance. I do know he was in my backyard for a few minutes because I was in my bathroom for several minutes until I decided to peek out my balcony window. I saw him walking to his car and getting in. That also tells me that I don't think he was here to rob me, but something more sinister. Luckily, he was lazy because, again, I live on the cheaper side of town, so you can imagine the quality of my doors and locks. I'm really hoping it was just some guy who was drunk high and had the wrong house, but my gut is telling me otherwise. Regardless, I hope we never meet again. AOL was popular when I was 13. America Online was a big thing when I was 13, or in other words, for my generation, AIM, which stood for, you guessed it, AOL Instant Messenger. It was around 2002 and I would have been a fresh 13 and in 8th grade. I had many times went into chat rooms by myself or with friends goofing around. Unfortunately, unsolicited photos were a thing then too, but usually you could stay clear of it by the chat room you entered. I didn't have any photos of myself, and back when you had to take a digital photo and upload it from your camera. Plus, I was 13 and self-conscious, which I'm sure anyone can relate with. But one day a guy popped up on my screen wanting to chat. It went fine at first. I was very naive back then and we quickly fell into a pattern of talking. His name was Dave and lived in California. Eventually, him telling me he loved me, etc. But the problem was, he was 19. Now, I wasn't proud of this, but at first, being 13, I just sent pictures of some random girl and said it was me. He instantly fell for me, telling me age is just a number and how mature I was. Now, at this point, he did not live in state, so there was never any chance of us meeting. Eventually, he told me he and his mom were moving up to a city that was about an hour and a half away from me. He started begging me to see him and go to a movie. Anything. I had to break the catfishing truth and say those were not pictures of me, but of someone else. He was furious. He had been looking forward to a different type of child this whole time. Dave forgave me a few days later, saying, "I still want to meet you because I love you. All the things you say to a young girl to get her to swoon." I think back and I'm like, wow, I was 13. So I told my best friend everything I just explained above, and that I wanted her to go with me to meet him. There was a whole plan about him driving to see me and going to the movies to finally meet what I thought was the love of my life. I had been brainwashed into believing this was normal. I didn't tell my mom, of course, and honestly, she didn't notice any of it was going on to begin with. So the day my friend and I were going to meet up with Dave, her mom came and picked us up from school. She said something that made my stomach drop into nothingness. She said, "Chrissy, you're not going to the movies. You are not going to meet that man. You are going to get seriously hurt or kidnapped, and I can't allow you guys to go." I cried and cried because I honestly thought I could handle everything and be fine. She told me she wasn't going to tell my mom. I had to promise to never speak to him again and never plan to meet a stranger online. He ended up showing up and was upset I wasn't there. He went on AIM, flying off the handle like I hadn't seen at that age. It scared me. It scared me how close I was to this man being near me. I never talked to Dave again, but I easily believe I would have been kidnapped or worse that day if my best friend's mom hadn't stepped in. My mom would have been none the wiser. But I'm here today and learned a dire lesson. I have a bad habit of walking alone at night. I love it. I know it's not the best plan as a small woman, but it is one of those things that just gives me joy. Speaks to my soul, I guess, as cheesy as it sounds. I do carry pepper spray and keep my phone in my hand. But hell if I'll let fear ruin something I love. Summer nights are the best. The light lingers forever in the PNW. You get these endless twilights, and there's this beautiful breath of coolness coming out of the dense green, even when it's hot in the daytime. I lived in the desert as a teenager, and I still just love the cool, silky feeling air here. Silly, but I do. Soaking up the night air is amazing. I live in a small town at the head of a very long rural trail that winds through lowland marshy areas, dense woods, fields, and at night it is silent and isolated. 99.9% of the time, nobody is out there in the night except me, bats, and the rare bicyclist. Once you get outside city limits about a mile, small town is small. There's nobody to fuck with, so there's nobody looking to fuck with you, if you get my meaning. The only houses are sparse and far across ravines and fields covered with blackberry cane. No streetlights, and no easy exit from the trail. I put one headphone in. I keep one out for Mia Zapata to date myself. And I walk for hours and miles. I usually take a big crossbody purse with a water, my ID, a little cash, and start to walk while the light leaves the sky. I only use my phone light when it gets pitch dark. This night I was far out into the boonies. Just me and the maple trees kissing over the trail, and it was full dark. Really deep dark by then. And I'm cruising along, listening to a podcast in one ear with my little phone light. Beautiful night. I'm just soaking it in and have been out for a few hours and heading back, but still some miles out. Suddenly there's this extra black patch, like a big splotch resolving itself out of the dense shadows across the trail. Took me a sec to realize, oh yes, that's not a trick of the light. It's actually something. It's a big black mass all across the trail in front of me. Not moving, but it's blocking the trail. I start getting the creeps, chills. This is not normal, and it's between me and home. There's no other choice, so I slowly creep up to whatever it is, a black puddle. Then as I get close, I see blood smears. Not a lot, but fuck, that's Trace's blood on the paved trail. I put the big girl panties on and walk close, phone cued to 911. The shadow resolved itself into a dude in a big flappy black coat, sprawled across the whole trail. surrounded by small bloodstains. I say, "Hey man, are you okay?" And surprised, the guy sits up. He's sunburnt and grimy, but coherent and kind of chipper. He goes, "Oh, I'm okay, just resting. Hey, you got any water?" I forked over my water bottle and told him to go ahead and keep it. He took it and thanked me. He'd scraped his bare foot and wandered around for a bit before deciding to take a breather, which was what the blood was from. I recognized him. He's a local meth head. He's either slightly drunk and kind of peaceful or belligerent on meth. Today he was sobering up and tired. I asked him if I could call anyone, or 911 or whatever. Nope, just chilling. I carefully skirted around him and headed back home. I did not have particularly warm and cozy feelings about him, having hosed his puke off my porch a couple of times and been called, the see you next Tuesday word more than once by him. So I left it at that. Anyway, a few months later, he attacked a random tourist with a machete downtown in broad daylight, sliced their leg open and went to prison. A repressed memory that started haunting me after almost 15 years. Until a few days ago, I had no idea that this has actually happened to me. I'm not going to talk about the gruesome indirect circumstances that triggered this to start haunting me in flashbacks, but I will rather focus on the story itself, how I remember it, and how my cousin, who was with me when it happened, remembers it. For some context, my cousin and I are the same age. We are both women and currently 25 years old. She is only 5 days younger than me, and her family rented a floor in my parents' house when we were toddlers. So we basically did everything together and spent all our days together until we turned 5, when her family bought an apartment in another city, some 30 kilometers away from the city I lived in. Since we had a very strong connection, almost codependent, it was very difficult for us to get used to not living together. And 2 years later, we have made an agreement with our parents that we will visit each other each weekend. And during the summer break, she will spend 1 week at our place, and I will spend the other week at their place, and we will basically exchange like that until the end of the summer break. This went on for years. Since we were spending all our free time together, by the time we turned 10 or 11, we have already exhausted all our adventure ideas in the backyard. Tree climbing, building a tree house, setting up tents, camping in the backyard, etc. And we really needed something new, so we have decided to go fishing together every Friday on the river near my house. It's a 20 minutes walk. Now, of course, we had no tools needed for a true fishing experience. We had a butterfly net that we would place in the water, and on a good day, we would catch a dozen of tiny fish with it. That was enough for our restaurant game. We would come back home, bake the fish under the sunlight, and then serve it, and decorate it in plastic plates that we would later serve to our imaginary customers. We've done this for weeks, and always made sure we were safe while doing it. We never actually got into the river. And that wasn't that difficult since it's a very peaceful neighborhood. We call it the Yellow Bridge. And there was usually no one else at the river at the time we were there. But one day, it was different. Very different. How I remember it. A couple of days ago, the memory of this encounter suddenly spilled out in my mind. We were either 10 or 11 years old, and it was Friday. She was at our place that week, so we took the butterfly net and went fishing on the river. We were alone, sitting under a large willow tree right next to the river. Suddenly a man showed up from nowhere. He was standing a couple of meters away from us. He had a blackish hair with plenty shades of gray, so I'm guessing he was in his late 40s or early 50s. He had a dark blue t-shirt, a little smudged on the collar. He asked us what we were doing, and we said we were fishing. He continued walking back and forth on that part of the shore. Now, under the Yellow Bridge, the shore itself is at least 500 meters long. He could have gone anywhere, but he stayed where we were at. Then he came a little closer, and we got up. He told us he was having issues with his wife, and we just nodded our heads, trying to avoid the conversation and follow the don't talk to strangers rule. We didn't ask him anything. He took a flip phone out of his pocket and opened it in front of us. "I have to show you my wife," he said. "Okay," we replied. When he found what he was looking for, he came even closer and turned the phone towards us. It was a picture of a completely naked woman sitting in a chair with her legs spread. We just nodded. He then proceeded to show us more pictures, and it was quite clear that it wasn't his wife because the pictures weren't of the same woman, but all of them were naked from head to toe, with their legs spread or in other very suggestive positions, now that I think of it. The quality of the images, the fashion and the aesthetics could be best described as pornographic content from the 70s. It could be that he took pictures from some old magazine or had them sent by someone. I remember I looked at my cousin and mouthed, "It's not his wife," and she nodded. "Isn't she beautiful?" he asked. "She is," I replied, and my cousin nodded. We then remembered that we have left our net in the river, so we went back to the willow tree and reached for the net. He was standing there in the same spot as before, looking at his phone. He then showed us a very low-quality picture of two naked men and another naked woman. This picture actually looked like pictures taken with a flip phone camera. "This is me," he said, and pointed at one of the men in the picture. We just nodded and said we had to go home. He then said the words that have been haunting me for days now. "You think my wife is beautiful? She thinks you are beautiful too. She would love to meet you. Come with me to meet her and we can play together." "No, we have to go home," I replied. "You little party breaker. Maybe your friend doesn't want to go home. Come on, I want to play with you," he said and turned to my cousin. "No, I really want to go home," my cousin replied. This is where the details of the memory stop. What I remember next is him giving up, just not being there anymore, and us leaving, giggling and laughing as we walked away and mocking his voice and his tone on our way back home. But I found it weird that only after so many years have I remembered this situation, and I've brushed it off as a potential dream or false memory. But since his words kept echoing in my head, I called my cousin and described my memory, word for word as I've described it here. And she said that it did happen, just slightly different from how I've remembered it. How my cousin remembers it. It happened. All the details are correct, but once she told him she really wants to go home, he was way too close and we were scared to start running or turn our backs, since we thought that he could catch us. So we stayed there for a while and kept pretending like he was not there. We played with our catch, the tiny fish in a bucket filled with water, and talked about our fathers who work in the police. Obviously it was a lie. Her father's a forest ranger and mine works in IT, and how they're so strong that they could kill a man with one punch. The man didn't believe our exaggerated story, and he kept walking in circles around us, not too close. But he did keep an eye on us the entire time, and we waited, and waited, and waited. And at one point he went into the bushes behind us to take a piss. This is when we got up and started running. We ran across the bridge and kept running until we got to the part of the neighborhood where there are lots of houses. When we were already close to my house, I stopped in the middle of the road and said that my legs won't move, so she helped me get down on the side of the road, and we sat there until I felt better. Today, I know that what I experienced was a state of shock. Once I felt better, we went back home, threw away the fish, and decided to never go fishing again. Stalked by a client. Trigger warning: child abuse. I used to be employed as a child protection worker. A report came through about a stepfather who was being abusive to his children. I was given the investigation by my team leader. When I interviewed the oldest child with the police, she had very visible physical injuries and told me exactly what had happened. I'll spare the details, but it was horrific. As the children were in his sole care, we knew that they needed to be removed immediately. We sent a team of 2 workers out to the children's school while myself and a colleague called the stepfather into the office. I led the interview and it was horrible. He didn't even try to deny that he had hurt his stepchild, basically saying, "That's my kid, I'll do what I want and you can't stop me." When I served him with the paperwork, he absolutely lost his mind. He was swearing and screaming and said, "If we were outside this building right now, I would kill you." We ended up running out of the interview room, pressing our emergency alarm, and I even had to make a police report about the whole thing. It got really messy. The next day we had court for the children, and my manager decided I shouldn't attend due to everything that had happened the previous day. My colleague who attended told me that this man was at court and yelled several times something to the effect of, "Where is that worker who took my kids?" I remember feeling a little freaked out, but it's not uncommon to hear things similar to this when you have to remove a child. It's understandable that emotions are very high. You build a bit of a resilience working in this field, and overall, I mainly felt relieved that those children had been placed with an aunt and were safe. About 2 weeks later, I had to stay back late at the office on an unrelated job. It was about 9 p.m. when I finished, and I was the only person there. I walked out the back of the building to my car. It was really dark, but when I got close I thought I saw a shadow moving at the front of my car. Just for a second, and then it was gone. I was about 20 meters away at this point, but it startled me. I stood there for a second, just looking at my car, wondering if I was just being paranoid. While staring into the darkness, I started hearing tiny rustling noises, and whether imagined or not, all of the true crime horror stories I've ever heard flashed into my mind. Safe to say, I freaked myself out and sprinted back to the building. I called my boyfriend to come and pick me up, explaining what had happened. By the time he drove up to the front doors, I had convinced myself I was being silly and asked him to drive me around to my car. He circled around, and with the headlights shining on my car, I could very clearly see that all 4 of my tires had been slashed. I was an absolute mess that night and called the police immediately. I was pretty sure that this man was responsible, but as I hadn't seen him, I couldn't say for sure. I took a few days off and came back to a meeting with my manager, who had put together a safety plan for me and the other staff. She'd organized to have a security guard escort us to our cars and said very clearly that no one was to stay in the building after hours alone. Then, about a week later, a letter was delivered to the office addressed to me. Any mail that comes into the office goes through our reception staff. Our lovely receptionist opened it, and it was a note that said, "You're as good as dead, bitch." The words were typed and printed. She was an older woman and burst into tears when she read it. It didn't say who sent it, but I'm convinced it was the same man. Over the next few weeks, letters kept coming, each one getting longer. They addressed me as bitch and home wrecker, saying that I kidnap and abuse children. It was just horrible, horrible stuff. The threats in the letters were the worst. The person writing them threatened to rape, torture, kill, find out where I live, and to burn down the entire building. To be honest, the police were less than helpful. They basically said that given the nature of our work, they couldn't conclusively say it was this man, although they had questioned him. To me, it all seemed like a pretty massive coincidence. I'd never had anything like this happen before. They did say they were taking the letters very seriously and tracking down where they had been posted from, but I never heard anything back about that. My workplace took the threats very seriously too. All of the security was bumped up across the building and all staff completed refresher training on emergency management. One day on the way home from work, I noticed that a car was following me. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, so I drove down a bunch of little streets, double-backed onto the same route in a way that would make absolutely no sense. Even after all that, a dark green Camry was still paced a little way behind me. I freaked out, but had already planned in my head what I was going to do in this situation. I headed straight to the police station, planning to pull right up to the front of the building and beat my horn until I had someone's attention. The second I pulled into the police station, the green Camry drove straight past and disappeared down a nearby side street. I sat there for a good 20 minutes, too scared to get out of the car in case they came back around the corner. It dawned on me that in my panic, I'd forgotten to get the license plate. That upsets me to this day. I told the police what I knew, but they told me that the man didn't have any car registered in his name. This was the final straw for me. I was a nervous wreck. I was looking around constantly at work and at home. I knew that he lived relatively close to me, so I even stopped going grocery shopping in case I ran into him. I stayed on stress leave for a month and heard from colleagues that the letters kept arriving. I was very honestly ready to quit, but then COVID happened. It really changed everything. Everyone went into lockdown and all access to the office was restricted. I started back working from home, driving a work car to and from appointments. I didn't go into the office regularly anymore, only allowed in small working groups when absolutely necessary. Over the next year, the letters slowed and eventually stopped. By the time we were allowed back in the office, there hadn't been any sign of this man for almost 7 months. About a year later, I left child protection. I don't know what happened with those children, but my hope is that they are happy and safe with their family. And as for the man who I believe stalked and threatened me for doing my job, let's not meet ever again. A strange woman harassed me at home, demanding to see someone that never lived here. I'm a woman in my 30s who lives alone in a small house at the head of a quiet cul-de-sac in the UK. The street is a maze of roads away from the main road, which means that other than delivery guys and the occasional salesperson, you very rarely see anyone that you don't recognize. I don't exactly know all my neighbors, but I know what they look like and I know where they live. I can recognize their cars, etc. This weirdness happened over the space of a few months several years back. I work from home, so I'm usually in, and sometimes I don't have a lot to do. The first day was one of those lazy days. It was about 4 p.m. and I'm sitting on the sofa watching some daft shit about alien cover-ups. Someone knocked on the door. I have a surveillance camera hidden in the wooden canopy above the front door, so I checked to see who it was because I wasn't expecting any deliveries, and I couldn't be bothered to deal with a salesperson. It was a woman who looked late 40s to early 50s, very smartly dressed, like really expensive clothes and jewelry. Stuff I could never afford. Most people around here generally couldn't afford it either. We're not an affluent area, and this lady stuck out like a sore thumb. She looked flustered and agitated, glancing towards the back garden before trying to look through the tiny frosted glass window on the front door. I noticed she was carrying a dog's lead, but I didn't see a dog. As it happens, at the far side of my back garden, there are 2 hedges. There's the hedge that I own within my property boundaries, and there's a second hedge outside my boundary that's council-owned along a small grassland where people walk dogs. I know for a fact there is a hole in the council-owned hedge, which I've reported it to the council at least a dozen times over the past decade, and they've done the square root of sod all about it. Because of my hedge, I can't reach it to do anything about it myself. Consequently, when I saw the dog's lead, I thought, shit, I bet her dog has gone through the hole. If it's a big dog, it's not getting into my garden, but if it's a small dog, it might be able to work its way through, and I've always got some cooked meat, so I figured I might be able to lure it out. I am a dog lover, so of course I want to help this woman if I can. When I was a kid, my own dog went missing for a few weeks, and I thought I was never going to get him back. I was heartbroken for those weeks, but fortunately, we did get him back, and ever since I've been extremely sensitive to pets in need. I open the door and this woman gives me the weirdest look, like she was expecting someone completely different to answer the door and that I shouldn't be there. To be fair to her, my mum used to live here too, so I didn't think much of that weird look to begin with. Maybe she was expecting my mum. I say, hello, and she just stares at me for the longest 30 seconds before she tries to look past me and asks to see Margaret. I don't know what it is about other people's mistakes, but whenever someone has the wrong number, I always end up apologizing as if it's my fault. So that's what I did, apologized and told her there was no Margaret at this address. Again, she gives me that look, only this time there's anger behind it. Yes, there is, she insists. It occurs to me at this point that I have a relative called Margaret, but she lives about 60 miles away and I haven't seen her in years. Nonetheless, just in case she's got her addresses muddled, I ask, "Are you looking for Margaret, surname?" But she just hisses at me. "You know exactly who I'm looking for. What have you done with her?" I'm absolutely lost at this point. I've lived here 20 years and I know the name of the previous owner, so I know she's not asking for them. I also know the names of the neighbors and the names of the people who have lived on the street in the time I've been here and since moved. None of them are called Margaret. So, all I can do is tell her she's got the wrong address. "No, this is my address. You're lying." That was a tad alarming. She's at the right address. She's not knocked on the wrong door. However, she clearly thinks I've done something to somebody who, to the best of my knowledge, has never lived here. I don't know how long the previous owner had this house, but we must be talking about at least 30 years since anyone called Margaret might have lived here. It's at this point that I notice that she's subtly wrapped that dog lead around her now clenched fist, like she's planning to use it as a weapon. In my youth, I did plenty of self-defense training, so I'm not exactly scared of her, as such, but I'm obviously getting a bit concerned about the situation that's brewing. I don't particularly wish to get involved in a brawl on my doorstep with a complete stranger. I'm torn between shutting the door in her face or trying to de-escalate the situation. In the end, I close the door a little, so she's got less to aim at, and tell her, "Look, I don't know who you're looking for, but if you think something's happened to your friend, maybe we should just call the police and let them sort it out." Sure enough, the woman slams her fist with the lead wrapped around it into my door. I later discovered she'd struck the door hard enough to crack the frosted glass window in the middle of it. She's bleeding from doing it. It must have hurt, but she doesn't flinch or show any sign of pain. What the hell? Any confidence I had in my self-defense classes started to waver here because I'm not used to people who don't feel pain. All I can think now is that she's on something and having a really bad trip, So at this point, I put on my scariest voice and tell her to get the fuck back. I let her know I'm calling the police, and if she's still here when they get here, she can deal with them, because I'm not dealing with her anymore. She tries to stop me from closing the door, but I shove her back and manage to get it closed and locked. I make a point to stand next to the door while I'm calling 999 so she can hear me. While I'm waiting for the police to turn up, I watch her on the surveillance feed. She moves out of shot multiple times, presumably to check the back of the house, and I hear her calling out for Margaret. A few minutes before the police finally turn up, I see her kick over my wheelie bins in a rage, but then the most chilling thing happens. She walks back to the front door and literally stares directly into my camera. That camera is pretty well hidden. I'm not saying that nobody could spot it, but most people would only know it was there if they'd been looking for it. Most people aren't looking for cameras, right? She knew it was there. She must have eyeballed it previously. When? I don't know. I later reviewed all of the footage I had from that day, and she never made eye contact with it once. She never even looked in that direction. I only had about a week's worth of footage before the oldest footage is overwritten, and I checked everything I had and she was only on camera that day. All I can think is she'd been here more than a week prior. While she's staring right into it, she flips me the finger and then makes a throat-cutting gesture before walking off. I head to the window to watch her leave, and she's walking like she doesn't have a care in the world. She doesn't look back, just wanders away. Police finally show up. Good job I wasn't being murdered. Take a statement. I give them a copy of the surveillance footage, and that's that. I called a couple of times to follow up, but nothing. Nobody ever called me about it. I won't lie, this shit me up for a few weeks. I moved the knife block closer to the door, though out of sight of any of the windows. I started staying up really late and not getting much sleep, which really didn't help. On some nights, I was so tired that I started experiencing auditory hallucinations. I'd hear people who weren't there talking, and because this woman was the cause of all my stress, I heard her voice and the name Margaret most of all. Every time I heard the gate open, it put me on edge. I'd review the surveillance footage every day. Eventually, as the weeks passed and I hadn't heard anything else, I started to regain some of my comfort and just put it down to a weird experience. It didn't last. About 4, maybe 5 weeks after the first encounter, she came back. It was just after midnight. I was in the living room mucking about on my phone with the TV on low volume for some background noise. I heard a car door slam and peeked out the front window. A dark-colored car was parked at the end of my driveway. I couldn't see what make or model it was, but it looked like some sort of estate car. I think Americans call them station wagons, right? I didn't see anyone moving about, but a minute or two later, the front gate swung open with its metallic groaning, and there was a knock on the door. Even when I'm not involved in a blood feud over imaginary Margarets, I'm not going to answer the door at that time. I checked the surveillance camera. Its night vision mode is pretty shitty, but I'm positive it's that woman again. I can even see what I think is the dog lead, and of course she knows I'm watching her because she looks at the camera again. And I tell you, when someone is already giving you the heebie-jeebies, the way night vision makes people's eyes look like soulless black voids doesn't do much to make you feel better. Suddenly she yells out, "Shut that fucking racket off and come out here, now!" I had the TV on, but as I mentioned, it was on a very low volume. There's no way she could hear it from outside the front door. I couldn't even hear it if I walked into the hallway. I'm convinced at this point she's mentally unwell, so I called the police again. I want them to stay on the line, but they just tell me that someone will be over soon and to call them back immediately if things escalate. So I'm waiting, watching, and just hoping she doesn't start trying to smash a window or something. She kicks over my wheelie bins again, don't know what she's got against them, and yells something else out, which I couldn't quite make out, but whatever it was enough for one of the neighbors to come and investigate themselves. I watched the neighbor talking with her for a minute. She's remonstrating about something, wagging her finger towards my front door, but my neighbor is eventually able to get her to leave. He even sticks around for a bit to make sure she's gone. Sadly, that also means she'd gone before the police turned up again and made me feel like I was a bother to them. Another statement, handing over more security footage, more nothing. I caught up with the neighbor the next day and he apologized because it didn't occur to him to make a note of the registration plate. But he told me that she'd said much the same thing as she'd said to me previously, that she wanted to know where Margaret was and what I'd done with her. I'm grasping for answers at this point. Even if she's mentally unwell, the fact she's sticking to this Margaret story and has the right address makes me think there's something more to this than somebody having a breakdown. Then it clicks. Is Margaret her dog? Does she think that I've stolen her dog? Did she have a dog go through the hole in the back? Does she think I've hurt her dog? Is that what this is about? It'd be another few weeks before she came back. This time at 3 a.m., I'm awoken by knocking on the door. A few minutes later, I hear tapping on the bedroom window. I know it's her. I can hear her saying things, but I can't really make them out because they're too muffled through the windows. It's like she didn't want to get the neighbor out again, so she's trying to keep it quiet. I jump out of bed and put some clothes on as quickly as I can. I try and follow her as best I can as she moves around the outside of the house, from room to room, knocking, tapping, and muttering. I think I hear a few coherent words like noise, racket, and I'm pretty sure she called me a bitch, but maybe I was imagining that. I can't check the surveillance footage this time because she spray-painted the damn lens. Not that it'd matter much this time. She's not lingering by the front door. I think about calling the police again, but it's proven a waste of time so far, and I get the feeling if I call them out a third time and she's gone, then they're just going to start accusing me of wasting their time, even if I do have the evidence. They've not exactly been that helpful so far. In the end, I wait by the front door and listen for her. Eventually she knocks again and I call out, "Is Margaret your dog?" Dead silence. Nothing. I can't see anything through the frosted glass because it's too dark. I have no idea where she is, and I don't want to turn the outside lights on. I don't even know why. She knows I'm in the house because I've called out to her, but I still don't want to draw any more attention to myself. I end up standing there for who knows how long. At least an hour, probably more because the sun starts coming up. My heart is going a mile a minute pretty much the whole time. Once it's bright enough, I start checking through windows to see if I can see her. Nope, nothing. I tentatively open the front door and look outside. Still can't see her. I grab something to arm myself with just in case, can't remember what now, and check all around my house and the back garden. She's not there. As I'm heading back to the front door, I spot the oddest thing. The gate's closed. That gate is physically attached to the side of my house, and when it opens and closes, it makes a fair bit of noise. You'd definitely hear it if someone opened or closed it when you were standing next to the front door, but it's closed. So, what does that mean? Did she jump it somehow? It's possible, I guess, but I wouldn't want to try it. Anyway, I open the gate and head out to the end of the driveway. I look around, and there's no sign of anyone. I turn back to the house and see she spray-painted "liar" on the front of my house and left the dog lead on the floor beneath it. That was, thankfully, the last time I ever heard from or saw this woman, but I think she still comes by sometimes. Ever since all this happened, I get these creeped-out feelings occasionally at night and check out the window. I don't know whether I'm imagining it or what, but now and again I swear I see a dark-colored estate car out on the street. Not parked at the end of my driveway these days, but I just can't shake the feeling she's in there, watching my house. Perhaps she was looking for her dog and she keeps thinking that she'll see me with it,